Every good scout knows the first rule. You don't kick down the door to find out what's in the room. You don't even knock. You sit outside, in the dark, and you listen. To the guards talking, to what gets delivered and when, to the schedule nobody bothered to keep secret because nobody thought anyone was watching. By the time you're actually ready to go in, you already know the layout, the shift change, which guard talks too much. Nobody broke a single law getting any of that. Nobody touched a single lock. They just paid attention to what was already being said out loud. This is something new. I'm calling it a field manual. Every so often, we're going to step out of the main campaign for one of these. No party, no ongoing arc, just one piece of the world taken all the way apart, start to finish, in one sitting. Today's piece is the one I get asked about more than almost anything else. How do you learn everything about something? A piece of software, a company, a loan shark you maybe should have paid back by now, without ever asking them a single question? The answer has a name: open source intelligence. OSINT. Fair warning up front, this one runs long. There's a lot of ground here, and it's worth all of it. I'm the architect, and this is the Scout's Eye. Before we get into technique, one piece of discipline first, because it's going to matter for literally everything that follows today. A good scout doesn't just report what they saw. They report how sure they are. Real information gathering comes down to two questions, and a good scout asks both every single time. The first question is, how much confidence do I have in this information? A high amount is if you saw it with your own eyes, or multiple independent things you found all point the same way. Medium, if one credible source told you and nothing contradicts it, but nothing else backs it up either. And low, if you're guessing based off other clues and nothing more. And then question two, did I observe this information myself, or did I infer it from other information? Observed means you saw it directly. Inferred means you reasoned your way to it. Here's a small example so this isn't abstract. Say you find a subdomain called staging payrolls sitting in a public record. That the subdomain exists, observed, hi, you saw it yourself plainly right there. That it's currently vulnerable because it looks old. Well, that's inferred, and it's low until you actually find a second independent signal pointing the same direction. A scout who reports both of these equally certain is not actually a scout. They're a guesser wearing a scout's coat. Here's why all of this matters more than you'd think. Everything in the next three sections of this episode is the same two questions answered three completely different ways. A host name that leaks off of a network broadcast, that's observed, high. A guess about what some obscure device on the network is actually used for, that's inferred, at best, medium. A good scout never quietly upgrades a guess into a fact, and neither should you. Keep this in your pocket. We're going to come back to it more than once. Section 1. 3 to go after this. The network itself. Here's the problem with the obvious approach. If you want to know what's running on a network, the obvious move is to ping every address and probe every port. See what answers back. Don't do that. It's loud. Modern detection, EDR, XDR, basic intrusion monitoring, exists specifically to notice exactly that kind of noise. You knock on 100 doors in 10 seconds, and somebody notices the knocking, even if every single door stays locked the entire time. There's a mechanic in tabletop that maps onto this almost exactly. An active investigation check means you're doing something, searching a room, moving furniture, prying open a chest, and something in that room can notice you doing that. Passive perception, on the other hand, is different. It's quiet. It's constant. It's the awareness that's just running in the background the entire time, and it never alerts anyone because you never did anything to be noticed. That's the entire thesis of this section. Everything you can learn without sending a single packet is something the target can never detect you gathering, because there's nothing there to detect. No door was ever knocked on. So what does passive actually look like in practice? One ground rule before we go further, because I'd rather tell you now than have you find out the hard way. Everything in this section assumes you're somewhere you're actually allowed to be. Your own network, a client's network, with a signed piece of paper saying you're allowed to sit on it. A genuinely public segment, open to anyone, no exceptions. That's not the same thing as parking outside a building you have no relationship to and pointing an antenna at it. That's not passive reconnaissance anymore. That's just trespassing with really good headphones. Keep that distinction in your pocket, because we're about to put two things next to each other that sound almost identical and are absolutely not the same activity. A good scout never lets the two similar sounding things collapse into one. We're about to be that scout on purpose for a second, so you don't have to learn the hard way later. You set up somewhere on the network, or close enough to it to be in range of it. A shared office Wi-Fi, a public segment, anywhere the signal reaches. And you simply record what's already broadcasting. 0 packets injected. We're not asking anything, but we're listening. Here's what's actually leaking, and it's more than most people expect. Layer 2 neighbor discovery, multicast advertisements, protocols like MDNS and LLMNR built specifically to make local networks convenient so a printer can announce itself, so a laptop can find a file share without anyone having to type an address by hand. And in doing that convenient thing, they announce device names, roles, and services to anyone nearby who happens to be listening. Not just the devices meant to hear it. Anyone. And I want to be honest about something here, because it's important and it comes up every time. This isn't usually a sophisticated flaw in the target's defenses. It's usually an administrator who never turned off protocols that were on by default from the day the device was unboxed, because turning them off was never specifically in the job description. The sophistication isn't in the leak. The leak is boring. Everyone has it. The sophistication is entirely on the listening side, knowing that the noise is there and knowing how to read it. Now, take all that leaked information, host names, service versions, device roles, and start assembling it piece by piece. What comes out the other side is a logical picture of the network, which segments exist, which devices actually matter, roughly how the whole thing is organized, floor by floor, department by department, built without a single authenticated connection to anything, ever. Here's the genuinely valuable find, the one worth watching for specifically. Dual-homed devices. Machines that quietly bridge a segment that's supposed to be secure and one that isn't. Almost always by accident, almost never on purpose. Think of the printer someone connected to both the guest network and the finance network, because it was easier than asking IT for a second printer. You find these by watching which traffic patterns cross between zones that are supposed to be completely isolated from each other. If traffic is crossing a wall that isn't supposed to have a door in it, there is, in fact, a door. Someone just doesn't know about it yet. And here's the part that should sit with you for a second, because it's the whole point of this section. This map, built entirely from outside, without permission, without a single alert firing, without anyone on the inside ever knowing it was happening, can end up looking almost identical to the network diagram sitting in the actual IT department's own internal documentation. Same picture, completely different level of authorization to have it. Section 2. Away from the network entirely, into the files themselves. Most file formats, photos, documents, PDFs, even plenty of audio and video, carry a second layer of data most people never think to look at. Not the visible content, information describing the file itself. That's metadata, and it rides along quietly with almost everything you've ever shared. There's a real term in tabletop for exactly this, and it fits better than you'd expect. Thieves can't. A hidden language spoken in plain sight, understood only by people who already know how to listen for it. To everyone else, it's just background noise, ordinary conversation. Metadata is exactly that. Sitting inside a file everyone can see, everyone can open, everyone can share, saying things only some people know how to read. This isn't a hypothetical for effect. It's happened. For real, more than once. And the pattern is always the same. Someone posts a photo with the best of intentions. A team celebration, a look at what we built moment. Something entirely innocent. And that photo's hidden layer reveals the exact physical location of a facility that was supposed to be secure specifically because nobody knew where it was. One photo, no malware, no breach in the technical sense at all, just a picture nobody thought to check before it went out the door. So what's actually recoverable when you go looking properly? From a photo, GPS coordinates, embedded automatically at the exact moment it was taken, down to a handful of meters. Device make and model, sometimes a serial number. A timestamp accurate down to the second, whether or not the caption mentions a date at all. From a document, something a little stranger, and a lot of people find this one unsettling. Revision history. Text that was deleted that you'd swear is gone, that is, in fact, still technically present inside the file itself. Recoverable by anyone who knows exactly where to look for it. Track changes that were accepted cosmetically but never actually purged from the file. I want to be clear about something, because it matters for how seriously you take all of this. None of it requires advanced tools. No dark web software, no exotic technique. Almost all of it is built directly into software everyone already has on their computer right now. This isn't a hacker's exclusive toolkit. It's one did you know video away from finding it, and plenty of people already have. Take enough of these small leaks and correlate them against each other. Sometimes against public social media activity happening in the same window of time, and you can reconstruct a working timeline. When something was built, where, in what order events actually happened. Not through hacking, through arithmetic and patience. The physical dimension of this is the part that tends to land the hardest with people. GPS data combined with a floor plan or even just a publicly available satellite image can narrow somewhere in this building down to a very specific room. Sometimes down to a specific desk or because of a specific window and a specific angle of light in the photo. One more thing worth knowing, because it cuts in both directions, offense and defense alike. Metadata can also reveal deception, not just location. Inconsistent timestamps, location data that doesn't line up across sets of files that are supposed to be from the same place in the same time, that inconsistency itself is a signal. Something was altered, or staged, or fabricated. The absence of a clean story is sometimes the most useful finding of all. Section 3, the longest one today. And this is the one most people underestimate completely. Here's the irony sitting at the center of this entire section. The information that maps a target's real weaknesses very often isn't secret at all. It was never hidden in the first place. It's filed with a regulator, a municipal office, a public registry, because the law requires it to be filed in the open for anyone at all to request. Think of it as consulting a kingdom's own public records. Land deeds, guild rosters, tax rolls, building permits posted at the town hall. Not breaking into the vault, reading what any citizen is legally entitled to read, because every kingdom keeps records, and most of them are open by design, not by accident. Translate that plainly into modern version. Corporate financial disclosures are the guild's declared holdings. building permits reveal actual physical infrastructure, power capacity, cooling systems, room layouts, sometimes even floor plans. Procurement and tax records reveal exactly what hardware systems were purchased and roughly when, which tells you how current or how ancient a target stack actually is. There's a whole second category of public record that most people don't think of as a record at all, and it's worth its own stop because it's some of the richest, most reliable material available, and almost nobody checks it about their own organization. DNS itself is a public ledger. Anyone, anywhere, can ask who owns a domain, where it's hosted, and which mail servers it trusts to send messages on its behalf. No permission required, no login needed. The entire system was built from day one to answer that question to anyone who asks. Certificate transparency logs are another one, and this one surprises people every time. Every valid certificate issued for a website gets entered into a public log by design, specifically so the whole internet can audit who's issuing what. Which means anyone can enumerate a target's subdomains just by reading that log. And the naming patterns themselves are often the real find here, more than the domains themselves. A subdomain called staging or internal API or test payroll tells you something the organization never meant to announce to a single soul. One more, and this one's a personal favorite because it's so easy to check and so rarely actually checked by the people it would matter most to. Email authentication. A domain can have a policy publish, called DMARC, and still be wide open because the policy itself can say, just watch and report, instead of actually reject anything that fails that check. Reading the fine print of a DNS record, one line of text, freely available, tells you how seriously an organization enforces what it already publicly claims to enforce, and most never bother to check their own. None of this touches the target systems. Not once, not even briefly. Whois, DNS, certificate transparency, these are all other people's public ledgers about the target. Third-party record books, kept by the registries and certificate authorities, not by the target itself. That's exactly why looking at them isn't remotely the same thing as attacking anything. Back to the paperwork itself, because there's still more to pull from it. Routine financial disclosures reveal recent acquisitions, cloud migrations, hardware purchases, each one a small clue about what systems exist now and roughly how modern or outdated they actually are. Leadership and executive transition filings reveal something quieter and easy to miss: organizational friction, a period where attention was clearly elsewhere, which is exactly the kind of period where security processes are likely to develop gaps, simply because nobody was watching that closely for a while. And the physical world version of all of this, building permits specifically, a permit for a facility often specifies power redundancy figures and cooling capacity. Combine enough of those numbers across enough filings, and you know a genuinely surprising amount about what's actually inside a building, without ever having driven past it. One more angle before we tie this section together, and it shifts the question entirely from what does the target have to is any of it currently being hunted, right now, by someone. Public vulnerability tracking, specifically the databases that flag which known flaws are being actively exploited in the wild, not just theoretically dangerous on paper, tells you whether a weakness sitting in the target stack is a live, urgent concern or mostly academic and nobody's actually using it. Breach site indices and leak site records do something similar, but for history instead of the present. Public, searchable records of past exposure tied to a domain, giving you an honest track record without needing a single insider to tell you anything. And there's a catalog for how attacks actually get carried out, step by step. The same idea as the monster manual we've built up across the series so far, but for real, documented, observed attacker behavior. Not, this could theoretically be abused. Here is exactly how this category of weakness has actually, repeatedly, been used against real targets in the wild. Bring back the logbook here, because this is exactly where it earns its keep all over again. This vendor shows up in a breach index. That's observed. High. Simple confirmed. This vendor is probably a target because their entire sector is. That's inferred, medium at best, and worth saying, but not the same sentence as the first one. Mixing those two up is how a genuinely useful piece of intelligence turns into a rumor wearing a report's clothing. Put all of this together: the financial filings, the digital ledgers, the threat data, and you find the thing that matters most in this entire section: legacy systems, hiding behind modern defenses. Infrastructure absorbed through an old acquisition or an unrecorded building addition, still quietly running years after everyone internally assumed it had been decommissioned. Nobody lied about it. Everyone just forgot. And the paperwork remembered for them. This kind of discovery costs nothing but time and a public records request. It can reveal gaps that would otherwise require expensive, loud, and easily detectable active testing to find. And it can be done by absolutely anyone with an internet connection and enough patience. And here's the synthesis across all three sections so far: the network listening, the metadata, the public filings. None of it required touching the target. Not once, at any point, any of it. That's what makes this entire category of exposure so genuinely dangerous. And it's also exactly why it's the hardest category to ever fully close. Because you can't unfile a record, and you can't unbroadcast a protocol retroactively. You can only get better at noticing going forward. Last section, 4 down. This is the one that ties it together. What do you actually do with all of this? Before anything else in this closing section, I want to say this plainly because it matters. Everything covered today shares one property all the way through. It never touches the target. Not the network listening, not the metadata, not the filings. No login attempts, no scanning, no probing. Nothing that crosses from watching into acting. That line isn't a technicality tacked on for legal reasons. It's the entire reason this is a legitimate professional discipline and not just a nicer word for intrusion. One honest correction before we go forward, because the entire point of this episode was never lying to yourself about what you actually know. Never touches the target meant two slightly different things depending on which section we were in. Files and public records, sections 2 and 3, you can do those from your own couch. Zero access to anything ever required. Section 1, the network listening, only counts as passive once you're already somewhere you're allowed to be. Passive and zero access are not the same word. And a scout who mixes those up is doing the exact thing we spent the whole episode telling you not to do, quietly upgrading something into a fact that it never actually earned. A real recon raises follow-up questions that genuinely can't be answered passively. You will hit a wall where the honest next question requires touching something. The professional answer to that is to never quietly cross the line to get the answer anyway. It's to say so out loud clearly and treat that as a completely separate activity, one that needs its own authorization, its own rules, its own sign-off. A scout reports what's visible from outside the walls. Someone else, with actual permission, decides whether anyone goes inside. Those are two different jobs, done by two different people, under two different sets of rules. So the defender's side of all this, since everything above works both directions. You can't unfile a public disclosure. It's already out there, permanently. But you can control what unnecessary detail goes into the next one. And you can audit what's already public before assuming nobody's ever looked. Practical steps, one per section, so this doesn't say abstract. Metadata sanitization for anything shared externally, with an honest caveat that automated scrubbing tools aren't perfect, and anything genuinely high stakes still needs a human to check it before it goes out. Disable the broadcast protocols from Section 1, MDNS, LLMNR, anywhere they're not actually needed, which, if you actually check, is most places. Tighten your published email policy from monitor to actually enforce. Not a policy that got set up once 5 years ago and nobody's ever revisited. and know precisely what your organization is legally required to disclose, so that nothing beyond the actual minimum ever quietly gets leaked into the filing alongside it. The core lesson, and it's the same one from the cold open, just fully unpacked now, all 4 pieces of it. Nobody has to break in to know almost everything about you. They just have to listen to the network, read the files, and check the public record, and grade what they find honestly instead of guessing and quietly calling it a fact. 4 sections, 1 discipline running underneath all of them, never once touching the target. And your quest objective. This one has 4 parts because this episode earned every one of them. 1. Check whether your network still has MDNS or LLMNR broadcasting on by default, somewhere it genuinely doesn't need to be on. 2. Pull the metadata off the last image or document that your organization shared publicly, LinkedIn or Facebook, and see what it actually reveals. 3. Look up your own organization's most recent public filing, financial permit, anything at all, and read it the way a scout would read it. While you're there, check what your own MDNS and DMARC records actually say to anyone who bothers to look them up. 4. Take one single thing you found doing any of the above and actually grade it. Confidence, observed or inferred. Don't just believe it because you happen to find it. Back to the beginning, one last time, because it's the whole episode in miniature. The scout outside your walls was never going to get caught because there was never anything to catch. No packet sent, no door touched, nothing done to anyone that could ever be noticed. They just paid attention to what you were already saying out loud. No guessing, just quietly observing and grading what they heard. The fix was never better locks. It's noticing what you've been leaving unlocked in public view and knowing, always, the difference between what you've actually confirmed and what you're only assuming. That's the Scout's Eye. Network, files, and public record. 3 ways of learning everything there is to know about a target without ever knocking on the door once. Back to the main campaign next time. I'm the Architect. We'll talk soon.